Could the Minnesota Wild be a stealth team in the Jack Eichel sweepstakes? Do they have the assets to pull it off, and what a deal might look like? We'll discuss the possibilities coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned today, I do want to once again talk about Jack Eichel and the most likely scenario that we see unfold this offseason, and that's the Buffalo Sabres trading their star player and current captain. It seems to me the relationship is pretty much not repairable at this point, considering all the comments from Eichel regarding his health and how his injuries have been handled, the lack of winning, all the losing and all that. I think it's time for both parties to move on. Now, we could see a possibility of Eichel maybe returning for one last season, allowing his no-move clause to kick in next year and having more control over where he goes, but I'm not really sure it's going to get to that, to be honest. I think most of the teams around the NHL are well aware of his comments that we saw at the end of the season, and then a trade is inevitable, and the teams are going to be lining up and pitching offers to Buffalo. So I do really think the odds are quite high that an Eichel trade happens this season. Now, we've talked to a great extent about the New York Rangers pushing to make the acquisition, and that they would likely be the team that many would consider to be the front runners, considering what they have to offer in a potential trade. Now, we've talked a little bit about the Los Angeles Kings. We've talked a little bit about the Anaheim Ducks also being in the mix, but a team that, in my opinion at least, does not get enough consideration and has not really been discussed enough as really being a true contender is the Minnesota Wild. Now, we've seen the Minnesota Wild be pretty much what we could call a surprise team this year after last year where things were heading. I think it's fair to say that the Wild didn't have real high expectations this year. We knew with Kirill Kaprizov coming in that things would be probably better on the offensive standpoint. He was going to be, a player who could ignite the offense. Obviously, he's a mature player after playing pro hockey, for the past 5-6 years in Russia. We knew he was going to likely have an outstanding rookie season and have an immediate impact. But the impact has been, I think, fair to say, even more than many expected. And as a team, they've grown and taken some good strides here, and they find themselves right up there, not too far behind teams like Colorado and Vegas in that Western Division. Obviously, there's a big gap between Vegas, Colorado, and Minnesota, and then you drop down to St. Louis. They've had an outstanding regular season, so we'll see what they can do in the playoffs. And I think that Jack Eichel is the exact thing that they're missing to really take this thing up another level and to be that much more competitive in Minnesota. Of course, the division alignment could go back to what they used to be next year, hopefully playing a full 82 game campaign, and things could be very interesting for Minnesota next year, and they might have a real opportunity to really be a more dominant force in the Western Conference. But having a top center join the team is exactly what this team is missing. GM Bill Guerin has made that known for some time, and he's obviously also had comments that he's likely going to have to draft and develop one because they're very difficult to trade for. They don't hit the trade market very often, but here we are. We have a top center who's arguably a top 10, 15 player in the game. So a real darn good center available here. Now, I think it's also fair to say that Bill Guerin is a general manager who's not afraid to take chances. He's not afraid to swing for the fences. And I think we're going to see some aggressiveness out of that side of things this offseason to make things even better in Minnesota. And they also have some assets that they're likely going to have to move to protect themselves from the upcoming expansion draft. And instead of having that be something difficult to play out, I think they could use that to their advantage here and possibly make an Eichel acquisition. So what might a deal look like, you ask? Well, let's take a look at some of the assets that Minnesota have that many of us might not have really thought as being either tradable or enough to get a deal done. When you look at teams like the Kings and the Rangers with all that young talent that they could consider including and throw in, first round picks, etc. The Wild are, some interesting pieces there as well. Now, a few players that I think are fair to say that are off limits would be obviously Kaprizov. As I said, he's the leader of that team offensively, having an outstanding rookie season, most likely winning the Calder Trophy. I don't see any way that they would even consider trading him. I mean, really, if you bring in Eichel but you lose him, you're no further ahead. So that makes no sense. So he's an untouchable, and many feel that Joel Eriksson Ek, after the season he's had, would likely be considered an untouchable as well. There probably wouldn't really be a whole lot of guys beyond that when you throw in some players that have some trade protection in their contract or undesirable contracts. Looking at Probably, the three blue liners that'll most likely be protected for expansion purposes, mainly because of their contracts and the fact that they have to, but obviously Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, or Ryan Suter. But you do have Matt Dumba. Now, Matt Dumba can be a pretty solid puck-moving right-shot defenseman. That's something that many teams covet. And a Matt Dumba trade this offseason ahead of the expansion draft is certainly something that's very, very likely to happen. We heard Bill Guerin talk before at length that the ideal return for a Dumba trade would be a top six centerman. It's something that they are desperately missing. So Eichel fits that bill. Dumba, it would be somebody I would suspect that the Sabres would have interest in. They have Rasmus Dahlin. Rasmus Ristolainen could be traded this offseason, but you bring in Dumba and, it adds a new dynamic back there. They also have some other younger blue liners to make things interesting as well, like a Yoko Haru, for example. So really, Dumba could be like the starting point to start the conversations. Clearly, a first-round pick would be at least one, first-round pick would be in there, maybe a first and a second, something like to that effect. And even though I said already that Kaprizov and Eriksson Ek are likely the two untouchables, what about a guy like Kevin Fiala? Now, you don't want to move out too many of your offensive players, but you're going to have to give something of value back here to Buffalo. But a combination of Dumba and Fiala not only satisfy Buffalo's appetite to get some offensive players in return, but also kind of level out things from a money and financial standpoint as well. I mean, Eichel's making $10 million. The Minnesota Wild do have some space right now that they can play with, but they also have some interesting contracts that need to be done, including likely Calder winner Kirill Kaprizov, who's going to be able to command some pretty big money after his rookie campaign here. So they got to pay him and keep him. Now, Fiala's also a guy who's up on term here. He needs a new contract. We know Dumba's making $6 million. You take the Dumba contract out and what the potential new deal for Fiala makes, and now we're in the neighborhood here. Now, I'm not sure exactly what Fiala's going to get on a new deal, but you would think that between what he's going to be able to get on his next contract and with what Dumba's making, the money would level itself out. So you get two players right there that are current players who can help today, which I know the Sabres are going to want at least one or two pieces of. You throw in a first-round pick, and then you throw in a prospect or some additional picks as well. Now, you're also, when it comes to prospects, I would assume that Marco Rossi, the Wild's top pick for the 2020 NHL Draft, would probably be somebody they would prefer not to include. Obviously, he could be that other top six center that they really need longer term here. So you could have Eichel and Rossi be your 1-2 down the middle here, assuming Rossi turns out to be the player we expect him to be. That could be a very solid top six pair of center icemen to work with for the next quite a few years. I mean, Eichel has a lot of term in his contract. Rossi would be just getting started. He had a really rough year after dealing with COVID and the long-lasting effects. Finally, it feels like he's back to 100% and able to start training here soon. So I would think Marco Rossi can hopefully start next season on time, be healthy, and get a good start to his career. Now, obviously, he'll need some time to really be that impact player that they expect him to be, but I would think of all their prospects, he would be the one guy that Billy Guerin would not want to include in a deal. But would they consider Matthew Boldy? Now, I would say probably not, but if a push comes to shove and you're getting a guy like Eichel, he's another possibility. Now, I'm not saying all of these guys are going to be included. They're just all possibilities to show what the Wild have for assets to possibly make this work. I mean, like I said, you have Boldy as an attractive prospect would be the next best one after Rossi. You got, first or second round picks that could be included. Guys like Fiala, guys like Dumba, and there could be some other ones on there. Maybe a Jordan Greenway. He's still young enough, a real big body guy who can play a different style of game. I really thought coming out of his college career that he probably would have been a more established right now and maybe been a stronger player than what he's worked out to be, but he's still a useful guy that they could certainly have in the Sabres lineup that they could consider wanting to be included here as well. So I do think the Wild are a team that you can't count out in these sweepstakes. And obviously, like I said, part of it's out of necessity that they want to trade Dumba so they don't lose him in expansion. And if they want a centerman in return, you're not going to get anything better. Now, like I said before, though, teams like the Rangers and the Los Angeles Kings and the Anaheim Ducks to some degree, probably the Kings and Rangers being the top two, have some really deep prospect pools or a combination of not just prospect pool, but like young players that are actively on a roster, playing at a young age and doing well. But, there's been reports that a team like the Los Angeles Kings wouldn't necessarily want to include Byfield or Turcotte, but they would be willing to talk when it comes to like Rasmus Kupari, Arthur Kaliev, Jared Anderson-Dolan, Cale Clegg, like other younger players to that nature, maybe Samuel Fadjimo, guys like that. So if you're not going to get Turcotte or Byfield, maybe that's not such an attractive offer. Not that those other guys aren't good. They are really good-looking prospects, but you want a high-end talent coming back. So suddenly you might have to think that if the Kings don't want to go there, as much as they'd love to have Eichel, they don't want to part with Turcotte or Byfield. Maybe they don't have such a great chance after all, unless they change their minds, of course. When it comes to the New York Rangers, many believe that they would not want to include Lafreniere or Kakko. And I would think, if I'm Kevin Adams, the GM of the Sabres, that's where negotiations start. I get a phone call from Chris Drury of the Rangers and wants to talk about Jack Eichel. I'm going to probably say I need a top young player in return. So I need Lafreniere or Kakko to be included. If he says I can't go there, then I don't think conversations are going too much further. I mean, after that, you're probably looking at a guy like a Philip Hedl, for example, who could have an impact now, get a bigger role, could possibly be a number one center, number two center. So I think he could be a real good player for them. I mean, not like he's anything to be real upset about, but when you have guys like Kakko and Lafreniere on the roster, suddenly he's a step down, right? Obviously, I'm looking on maybe getting a solid defenseman that's younger as well. I'm probably looking at, I'd really like to have K'Andre Miller included. Okay, maybe they don't want to go there. Then you have like Zach Jones, for example. You get Braden Schneider on the way. Like I want one of those pieces, but it depends on what they're willing to include. I'm looking at first-round picks, second-round picks, and maybe something or like a roster player. Who could that be? I mean, I would assume the Rangers would probably look to move maybe a Ryan Strome, for example. I don't know. Strome's fit well there, and he's played his best hockey there. But if they're going to have Zibanejad, Eichel, and Strome, that's just a lot of money. I mean, if Strome becomes their number 3 and Hedl moves on, that's pretty deep 1, 2, 3 down the middle. But from a financial standpoint, that would be awfully difficult to make work. So I don't know if that would really be something they could do. So suddenly the Rangers offer, if they don't want to go with a guy like Kakko or Lafreniere, and I understand why they wouldn't want to, respectively, but to get a guy like Eichel, you got to give up something substantial too, and maybe they don't go there. And so suddenly, maybe the Wild's offer is looking somewhat comparative. And like I said, they're a team that desperately needs a top 6 center. Eichel would be exactly what they need to take things up another level. They're not going to, if they don't do a Dumba trade, they're going to lose them anyway. So it's not like they're really going to be missing out. You throw in possibly one forward off the active roster, which, like I said, if it's not going to be Kaprizov or Eriksson, the next ask is likely going to be Fiala. You throw in a couple of picks, maybe a prospect. You have a pretty good looking package there. Now, I would assume their young goaltender too, Kakkonen. I would think that that's somebody they probably wouldn't want to move either, because the Sabres do need goaltending help, but they do have Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, and he could be their goalie of the future as early as the next season or two, so they might not be too concerned about that anyhow. But it'd be nice to have another young goalie prospect that could probably compete with him and so forth, because there's no guarantee Linus Ullmark returns. He's a pending UFA. He's got a lot going on personally. Didn't really commit either way. Committed to talk to them again, but hard to say what their goaltending situation holds. Hutton's a free agent. Like, there's a lot of holes there that need to be filled, and quickly. We saw Luukkonen play at the end of the year, but some feel he could use some more time to really prepare and continue to be either be the backup or continue to start at the AHL level for a little longer. So I don't know. I mean, I just think that there's a lot of teams that are going to be inquiring. I'd be shocked if all 31 teams don't at least make a phone call. And by 31 teams, I'd even throw the Kraken in there. Obviously, until the expansion draft comes and goes, they're not really going to have many assets to move. I would suspect that's not something we're going to see. But, at the end of the day here, every team is going to be interested to some degree. A lot of them right off the bat, because of financial reasons, won't be able to make it work. So they'll be out. And then you only have really like I said, maybe 5 or 6 that are real solid possibilities based on what they can put together for a package. I just think the Wild haven't been getting enough play. I've seen some reports by some insiders and some sources that we quote here a lot for our material on this channel that seem to think that the Wild are, really pushing here, that Bill Guerin is going to be aggressive and do everything he can to make this trade. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to happen, of course, but I think they could be real players in a Jack Eichel sweepstakes. So let me know what you think down below. Give me your mock trades. What do you think it would take for the Wild to make this acquisition? Do you see them being real solid contenders for his services? And will Bill Guerin continue to push here after a solid season to take this team up yet another level? So let me know your thoughts down in the comments and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news and rumors from around the entire NHL. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.